So Andy Frank, I'm the co-founder and president at a company called Sealed, which I'll kind of walk everyone through in a little bit, introduce the company. But as Maddie said, topic today is to talk through the measured savings pathway within the homes program. And Sealed, as I'll walk through, has had experience for about 10 years now in a measured savings world. It's been in the private sector, which I'll go through, but I thought that it would be helpful to share with all of you a lot of the things we've learned, as well as based on the way that the IRA is written, how we think that the measured pathway can be deployed by all states in a way that we think can have really, really great outcomes. So I'm going to share my screen. Great. Matt, is that full screen showing up okay on your end? Great, thank you. Awesome. So as I mentioned, goal today and try to get through as much of this as quickly as possible, so we can either end early or have as much time for Q&A as possible. But want to give a brief introduction to Sealed, mostly to give the context to everyone and kind of why we care about the measured pathway for our business, at least, or the kind of measured savings approach generally. Talk a little bit more about what measured savings actually is and why we think it really matters for the impactful rollout of the homes program. Get a little bit into how we think it can work, and again, how different stakeholders kind of play a role in the program. And then finally, and really focusing on kind of what we've learned about measured savings implementation, kind of the good, the bad, the ugly, and really what I think everyone should be thinking about as kind of the next phase of the program implementation rolls out. So with that, just a little bit about Sealed. We are a climate tech company on a mission to stop energy waste and electrify homes. We do that through the design, management, and financing of home weatherization and electrification projects. So things like insulation, air sealing, air source heat pump water heaters, basically anything that can help homes be more comfortable while using less energy. We're rolled out in 6 states right now: New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Wisconsin, and are expanding to 3 more in the DC metro area very soon, and we'll be in a few other parts of the country later this year. So, at a high level, you can think of Sealed as essentially a direct-to-consumer home energy retrofit company. So we basically do everything except for the actual work in the home, where we partner with local contractors who go to the home, verify the scope of work, as I'll walk you through, and then install the project. And as I'll talk through a little bit more detail in a bit, one of the key aspects of Sealed's business is that we put up the capital to make these improvements. We're financing it, but we're only paid back based on the actual energy reductions. And again, this is kind of very similar to the kind of measured savings approach more generally. One thing that we really focus on, and I think this is always an important thing that I love to share, is that we find that most homeowners that we work with, at least, are primarily motivated, actually not by energy or energy efficiency or carbon reductions or any of the wonderful things that we always talk about on these calls, but actually around comfort, health, safety, essentially quality of life, right? We're really helping people to solve problems like drafty rooms, icy floors, uneven temperatures, old, out of date heating, cooling systems, and poor air quality. So that's really what we focus on in terms of the consumer value proposition. And of course, the energy savings are a way to make that as impactful and as affordable as possible. So what Sealed does, as I kind of mentioned before, and we'll get into some more of the details of this later in terms of the practicalities of the measured approach, but basically we cover the upfront costs and coordinate all the work. So we sort of serve, and we'll use this language a little bit more later, as effectively an aggregator in the context of our contractors. So what we're doing is we're working directly with homeowners. So we're doing all of the marketing, outreach, customer education, sales, and we do it all remotely. So we have in-house teams that work with customers, and we have in-house solution engineering team that actually scopes the project remotely. And then once a customer is ready to move forward with the project, we connect them with one or more contractors who goes to the home and verifies the scope of work and then installs the project. Once the project is complete, we get pictures before and after from the contractor. Once we get that plus completion paperwork, we pay the contractor up front, and then our customers, homeowners, pay us back over time based on the actual energy reductions. So in other words, we're only paid based on the measured savings based on the actual performance of the work. So if we invest in a home and either overall or in a given period of time, they're not saving energy, we don't get paid. And we know that by looking at their past energy usage, adjusting it for weather and comparing that to their actual energy usage. And we'll, again, get into a little bit more of those details, but that's been kind of our experience in the market and kind of what's really shaped a lot of our on the ground experience in terms of the measured savings pathway. So taking a step back, kind of apart from sealed, kind of, as we talk about the measured savings pathway, what is it and why do we think it matters? So, first off, kind of very simply, the measured savings approach provides performance-based incentives using open source advanced measurement and verification software to determine energy usage before and after project installation. So in other words, instead of incentives that are given based on deemed or modeled estimates, you're looking at the actual energy reductions and giving incentives based on that. So you're essentially having a model an algorithm or calculation that defines that counterfactual, right? Basically, how much energy someone would have used if they hadn't installed projects, and then you're comparing that to the actual post-install energy usage, and those are the realized savings, and that's what incentives are given for. We think that this is a really important approach for the states and for kind of the policy at large for a few key reasons. It's first and foremost, I think, is that it's really meaningful from an incentive perspective. The way that the IRA bill, the homes portion of the IRA bill is written, based on at least our calculations using publicly available data, we think that most projects in most parts of the country are actually going to be able to get higher incentive levels per home, particularly for low to moderate income households with the measured approach. And this is largely to do with the way, again, the law was written, as well as the caps that are on the modeled approach at $4,000 for market rate and $8,000 for LMI. We also think it has really strong accountability built in, right? This is one of the features of the measured approach, and that's accountability both at the micro level, at the consumer level, because you have a stakeholder, in this case aggregators, which again we'll talk a little bit more about, that have a direct financial incentive to make sure that the project performance is really strong. And so if the project is not done well, the wrong equipment is chosen, contractors are not doing a good job, there's an accountable party who's going to kind of feel that in their pocketbook. And we think that's a really important market mechanism that is built into Sealed's business, and we've definitely shapes how we get to market. And then there's also kind of macro accountability in terms of taxpayer and in different contexts ratepayer money, where you're only paying based on the realized savings, and therefore it's a really strong, again, accountability to make sure that very precious taxpayer resources are being spent in a verifiable and impactful way. We think if you add all that up, it's going to mean a huge impact, right? I'm no energy economist, but 7+ terawatt hours seems like a big number for me, which is what we've modeled the total impact can be if all the dollars went through the measured approach. And then last, but I think certainly not least, especially for everybody working in the field and the contractors in particular, is simplicity. So with the measured approach, you certainly can, but don't have to do some of the things you would do in other approaches, including the modeled pathway around spending time, kind of putting more details about the project into different software, spreadsheets, et cetera. As we'll get into a little more later, there's a lot of kind of more advanced analytics that aggregators in the market can leverage to really minimize the time that the contractors have to spend on project and kind of rebate and incentive eligibility and calculations. So we think it has a lot of promise. Obviously, as we'll get into, it's a newer approach from a program design perspective, but based on our experience in the market, we think it offers a ton of advantages. So a little bit about how it works. So at a high level, the way it starts is very similar to any other program, right? One or more program administrator, state energy office. It will likely, bring on one or more program implementers to help set up and track the program. So making sure that the basic kind of rules are put in place, money is spent, according to the program rules, all the kind of crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and making sure that, basic information is available to the market. And this includes the advanced measurement and verification, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more later. But from there, it actually gets a lot simpler, we think, than a traditional program design, where you're oftentimes having to choose a lot of different details about the program, rebate amounts, eligibility criteria, all of these things that kind of go down the line, outreach strategies, all that good stuff. With the measured approach, you can actually leverage aggregators, and I'll talk a little bit more again in a second about how we can define those. But Sealed, for example, is hopefully going to be one of many aggregators that are in the market that are reaching customers. And so aggregators basically are providing the service to the market of developing the projects and taking all of the performance and cash flow risk. So aggregators will essentially provide upfront dollars to contractors and consumers, and then receive the incentive value over time as the projects perform. So a company like Sealed, for example, today, right, we put up capital and are paid back over the course of up to 20 years from our customers. This is not that long of a time frame, but in this context, an aggregator would essentially give value, give money to contractors and consumers upfront, and then would get back the incentive, assuming the project performs or a portfolio of projects perform over time. So I think one thing that we often hear from folks they have questions about is, with the measured approach, does this mean that consumers and or contractors are going to have to wait for a long time to get paid out the incentive? And based on our experience and based on what we think makes sense, that's absolutely not the case. Quite the opposite. In fact, we think that with the measured pathway and with aggregators doing their job, that contractors and consumers, if anything, will get paid, will get their incentive much faster because they won't have to wait for some of the processing that would otherwise happen through the program implementers. So we think that this is some way to really accelerate the market and be able to provide a lot of value. The other benefit there, and again, there's another benefit we think of the measured pathway and having aggregators be part of the mix, is it's a lot more flexible. So in a traditional program, typically the incentives are given as a downstream rebate, which is great, but oftentimes, at least what we found in the market, what motivates adoption is not always 100% providing value in that way. So for example, a contractor could choose to take part of the incentive value and use it to lower their prices. We work with a lot of contractors who do great work, really high quality work. And because of that, they usually charge a little bit more than their peers in their market. And so they have a lot of customers who will shop around their quotes, and they'll lose a deal because they were a little bit more expensive than their competitors, even though they're doing really high quality work that saves a lot more energy. So some contractors might want to just take part of the incentive to just lower their prices to be at better parity with their competitors. Other folks can use that money to lower financing costs, for example, right? Even though these are really great incentives that are being offered in the market, these are also very big projects that everyone's going to do, and so being able to provide financing it as great of terms as possible, we think is important. And then last but not least, you can also use the money to offer kind of additional products or services that may sound silly, but actually move the needle, right? We often offer customers a free smart thermostat, for example, which is really popular and people really love. And a lot of people will tell us, the reason I ended up doing it is because I like the idea of getting a free smart thermostat as part of the package. So it offers a lot of flexibility and innovation and creativity into the market that you wouldn't otherwise get. And then the other side of this is contractors can also invest in their own businesses, right? There's a lot of obviously great programs are out there. There's funding with the IRA and obviously at the state level for workforce development. And that's amazing. And we want as much of that to happen as possible. But we also know that contractors need to move fast and they need to be flexible. And sometimes they know better than we do, or that any of us do, when they need to invest in hiring another worker that's not going to be revenue generating for 3 to 6 months while they get trained, or putting down a deposit for a new truck so that they can increase their capacity. And so having that flexibility in the incentives, we think is really important to driving innovation and really market transformation in the market. So that's at a high level how we think the kind of program is structured. And we think the benefit of that is that it's actually a lot simpler because you don't have to define a lot of the rules. You don't have to do a lot of the kinds of training that you would otherwise have to do with the contractors because you have this aggregator piece that's able to essentially take a lot of the risk and complication kind of out of the market side of things. And to be clear, and we'll get into this, contractors can also be aggregators. Kind of anybody can be an aggregator as long as they're able and willing to kind of serve that role. But for this to be successful, what we've also learned is that data is absolutely key, right? So by definition with the measured pathway, you have to have data to know what happened, right? You have to have the data of what happened before the project was installed, and you have to keep tracking the energy usage for at least a year to find out what happened after the project was installed. And so what we think makes the most sense are kind of two concepts, all of the above and good, better, best. So all of the above, pretty straightforward. We think it's really important that not only the DOE, but that the state energy offices provide guidance and around flexibility with data access with consumers. A lot of people that I talk to, when you talk about data access, their mind immediately goes for understandable reasons to utilities, right? And there are some utilities that have done a great job at providing easy data access to companies like Sealed and many others. But the truth is that there are many parts of the country, if not most parts of the country, where those data access tools directly from the utility simply don't exist or are not practical. The good news is that there are a lot of other ways that companies in the market access energy data. So Sealed, for example, the primary way we get data from customers today is typically through third-party tools like Arcadia and Utility API that have basically been able to integrate, have software that is able to access energy usage data from almost every utility in the country. Where it's possible, we love working with utilities on different ways to get their data. But a lot of times, especially for things like delivered fuels, right, you actually need to get the data from the customer. So supporting them in emailing or calling their oil delivery company or sharing bills that they have. There's, again, different ways to get that. And then finally, this is something I'm just personally very excited about. There is increasingly great functionality and lower costs coming from sensors and devices in the home. So it's a lot easier today to put a wireless sensor, for example, on a propane tank or on an oil tank or on a gas meter to be able to get the energy usage data in as real time as you want to be able to track energy usage and energy savings over time. So there's a lot of innovation happening in this space. There's a lot of really good stuff happening in the private market, and we think that the measured pathway will be able to really leverage that and be able to benefit from that. And then the other framework, as I mentioned, is good, better, best. So, there are some states like California that are in the best category. They've been able to work, over the years with their utility partners to be able to share a lot of data, interval data, comparison group data, lots of really rich data sets that can be leveraged in these programs. And that's awesome. And we encourage every state to try and get to the best kind of the best category of being able to do this. But Sealed, for example, we've built our business for the most part in the good scenario, right? We don't have access for the most part to interval data or to utility comparison group data, but the measured pathway has still been something that we've been able to build on and execute on. And so we're confident that every state, no matter where you're starting from, can get started at least with the measured pathway, and then build on that over time as more data is able to be accessed from the utilities or from other sources. But having that flexibility, we think, is really key. And then just kind of review, these are kind of the stakeholders that we see in the measured pathway. So there's the program administrator, right? State Energy Office, program implementer. We've heard some presentations from many of those. They do great work to make sure everything is put together. There's standard rules. Everything is processed well. That will include open sourced M&V as well. And that's really important because you want to have kind of common rules, weights, and measures for being able to do this. And you want to make sure there's no black boxes in how you're calculating everything. So it's really transparent and clear. And then data providers. And as we just went through, there can be many data providers. This can come from the utilities, from third parties, from customer energy bills. You can kind of mix and match there. And then aggregators. So as I mentioned, an aggregator is someone who's going to develop projects and take on energy savings performance risk, right? And also do probably other market creation activities, right? Marketing, supporting customer education, providing, financing tools. There's a lot of companies out there, a lot of organizations out there that provide a lot of value, and being able to empower them to be able to be really flexible with how they provide that value to the market, we think can do a lot. And then finally, the contractor and the consumer, and they really just benefit from everything that comes above them, right? They're gonna receive the money or other forms of value up front, and they're not gonna have to do much other than share their energy usage data in the case of the consumer, and provide kind of basic information about the project and post-project verification on the contractor end. So this is kind of the way. I won't go through this in detail. Happy to refer back to it later if helpful, but this is kind of at a high level what the kind of program design looks like. So this is where you can have, and this is I think really important. There's not just one aggregator, right? We believe there's going to be many aggregators that are going to have different business models. So, talked about Sealed's business model. There are companies like Posigen, for example, who serve solar, rooftop solar to low-income households, but also install energy efficiency while they're there, right? They're an example of a company that could be an aggregator that is reaching a customer in a different way than probably others in the market are going to reach them, since they're starting with solar and then adding efficiency on top, right? There's a lot of companies like that can do that. Companies like NEIF, for example, that provide great loan products to the market. They can be an aggregator to be able to offer kind of better, more attractive financing products. There's a lot of different kinds of aggregators that can come out. And so again, it creates that innovation and really, again, towards the goal of market transformation. This, we think, is a really, really strong lever to do that. And so a couple examples, these are mock-ups. These are not live things, but these are the kinds of things we think are gonna pop up in the market in the measured savings pathway. So this is an example of a screenshot of what a contractor might see once they put in basic project information about what the estimated incentives are going to look like, right? So they can actually be able to tell how much money is available for me to integrate into the project economics. And then once that project is complete, right, a company like Sealed would send them a check or ACH upfront for those dollars. But all that they need to do is provide basic information about the home, basic information about the project, and then verification that the project was completed. Similarly with the consumer, right, they'll be able to pretty simply put in their utility credentials, be able to share their energy usage history, all opt-in, right? We at least at Sealed don't believe in customers sharing their energy usage outside of an opt-in program design, and then seeing what those incentives look like, right? And I think one of the things that we're going to see in the market is that a lot of the IRA incentives, right, that we're talking about here in this group are going to be stacked or braided with a lot of other state and local incentives. And so being able to have that in one place is likely going to be something that aggregators are going to be building in the market as well. So what have we learned? So as I mentioned, we're currently kind of deploying this in a private kind of private sector context, right? But I think again, a lot of lessons that are applicable to NASEO and to the implementation of these programs. And this is just a couple of screenshots about what this looks like, right? So customer on our end puts in their home address. They provide their energy history either through their sharing their credentials or by uploading some bills or CSV files of their usage. And then we basically take that from there, and we're actually then scheduling a design session with them to be able to map out what their project looks like, right? And we're able to do that partially because using the measured savings pathway, we don't have to be as prescriptive about the information that we need from our customers, because we can do, use things like machine learning to be able to be much more innovative and creative in how we're able to take the information that the customers do have and turn that into something that's really valuable for them. And so this is kind of what that customer journey looks like, right? There's an online qualification, introductory call. We do an energy profile analysis. We do what's called a solution review. We walk through kind of recommendations, proposals. They do verification in the field with one or more of our contractor partners. They get their project installed, and then we're billing them. And again, based on the actual energy reductions. So we're looking at their energy usage basically every month or every time a new bill comes in to be able to see what that looks like. Some challenges, right? So we talked a lot about data, right? And data is really, really important. And I don't want to kind of understate how important it is, because any given path can be challenging. This is why flexibility is so important, right? So getting utility provided data, for example, is great, but obviously getting utility cooperation, addressing privacy and security are all challenges that need to be overcome. Energy data management tools are also great, right? But there can sometimes be cost to aggregators depending on whether they're private or public tools. And sometimes you need multiple tools to cover all the utilities, right? So again, this is where flexibility is key. You can get direct submission of utility and fuel bills. This is pretty fail-safe, right? It works pretty easily, but it's a manual process that can increase soft costs, right? So private sector companies like Seal are always trying to develop better, easier ways to get this data. Similarly, delivery records from delivered fuel suppliers. And then finally, sensors and devices. So you can install these at a meter panel on other devices that track usage. And this, works really, really well. It gets you the data that you need, but there is obviously a cost to the aggregator to doing it. And typically you can only really use it for post-install data, because most customers are not going to want to wait for a year to have a device installed to baseline their home. So there's, a lot of different ways to get it. They all have their different challenges or trade-offs, but this is again why we think flexibility is so key. And the other thing that we find is really key though with the data is being able to leverage that data to be able to be really confident that counterfactual that we talked about earlier is accurate, right? Because if you can't reliably predict how much energy someone would have used if they didn't do a project, you can't really say how much energy they actually saved. And so what Seal does, for example, and what we found is as you get more and more data, it gets more and more accurate, even with things that have traditionally been more challenging, like delivered fuels like oil and propane, is we've been able to track and improve over time what we internally call baseline portfolio error. There's a nerdier name for it in the footnotes if anyone's interested, but it's basically just looking at how accurate your predictions are for homes that have not had improvements on predicting how much energy you think that they'll use versus how much energy they actually used. So your baseline is essentially pretty accurate, and you want to get it pretty close. You want that variance to be pretty low within a couple percentage points at most. And so we've learned a lot of lessons. We've talked about some of these already, so I'll go through them quickly. Data availability is important. Data flexibility is important. And also don't forget that most customers really care about quality of life. So the energy savings are great, right? But you want to make sure that when you're thinking about program design, when you're thinking about messaging and outreach, that you're really, really focused on comfort or other non-energy benefits that really move the needle. contractors, want a repeatable process. Shouldn't be a surprise to anyone on this call, I'm sure, to basically minimize the amount of time they're spending on paperwork, on modeling, on anything else. So again, any kind of program design that can minimize that paperwork or kind of soft costs are really important. We talk to contractors all the time that have a dedicated admin people that are doing some combination of energy audits, paperwork in the office, or people that are doing it themselves might spend 1 to 2 days of 5 days on paperwork related to incentive programs, and that really plays a big role, right, in increasing soft costs and making it challenging for scale in the market. And then the final thing is that we've been able to, it can be challenging, but aggregators are able to absorb kind of macroeconomic risks in measuring savings, like COVID. I think we can all agree COVID is probably as big of a kind of like macroeconomic shock to people's baseline usage as possible, but companies like Sealed are able to take that risk and are able to kind of manage it on the back end. So this is all possible. For kind of finish and take do any Q&A that the folks have. One thing that I think is important to acknowledge, and we've been doing it for a while, so sometimes we forget that it's how new this can be, but measured savings is has been around for a while, and there are a lot of programs that are leveraging it in one way, shape, or form, but it's still relatively new compared to deemed or modeled approaches. And so the way that we really think about this is kind of an analogy to electric vehicles, right? Where about 10 years ago, electric vehicles were seen as, just really scary, right? Who knows, everyone's gonna have range anxiety, they seem really complicated, or the battery is going to blow up all the time, really legitimate, but kind of existential questions. And a lot of great work has been done right over the past 10 years or so to create the foundation for now what's a really thriving and growing, EV market where, in the Super Bowl, every car company has an EV commercial, it seems like. But that doesn't happen by accident and doesn't happen overnight, right? And so we think that the measured savings pathway similarly is something that is going to lead to much better results at the end, right? We think it's simpler, less moving parts, dramatically more efficient, and ultimately much more effective at reducing greenhouse gases, right? But it's something that's going to require us all working together, thinking a little bit differently, being agile, right? Trying a few new things and adjusting when we learn some things. And generally taking approach that we're going to try something new. I personally think this is a great time to do that because we've all got the money from the IRA. It's federal money, right? So we don't have to go to our state legislators and governor's offices to do this or even use ratepayer money. But it is something that requires some new thinking. If you want to learn more on this kind of stuff, we've been posting regularly in blogs. So we'll share this. If okay with Maddie, we'll share this deck as follow up for folks to click in. And that's it.
Thanks for that. And I've already got questions saying, when will the recording be available? When will the deck be available? So folks are interested, so I will distribute it with everybody who's on the line and also the folks who are registered for the call but couldn't make it. So Andy, you did get quite a few questions in the chat. So I figured I would run through those and folks continue to post your questions there, or if you prefer, you can raise your hand and I will call on you and you can unmute your mic. You did get a few about the contractors, so I'm going to chunk all of them together into one question. The questions that you got related to contractors were, how do you find them? Do you have a pool of qualified contractors? And then maybe we'll just start with that one and we can keep going with the contractor questions.
Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, first off, obviously the contractors are really important. And honestly, I think the goal of any program design, especially the measured savings pathway, is to make it as easy as possible for contractors to participate, but also to incentivize and provide value to the ones that do the best work, right? So again, as I mentioned before, one of the problems that we hear from contractors again and again, the ones that do the best job, is it's hard for them to distinguish themselves in the market because it's hard for them to prove to their prospective customers that they do such work, right? This work is being done in the nooks and crannies of your home, in your attic, in your unfinished basement, right? In your boiler room, right? And it's also using technology that you may be excited about, things like heat pumps, but may not be familiar with, right? So it's really hard for contractors to distinguish themselves. So being able to leverage something like the measured pathway, where they're able to get more incentives because companies like Sealed know that they do a great job and will give them, more money for incentives because they can expect higher savings, to be able to then make that really simple to show the value to the customers is really important. So how we kind of find and work with contractors, to the question, Maddie, is first things we do, we find contractors in a variety of ways. First place we look are existing programs. So if there are existing programs that have list of contractors that have already been through a certification process, some sort of vetting process, we'll start there. That's always our preference. If that doesn't exist, or if we need to go beyond that, right, we'll get our hands dirty, right? We'll go on Yelp, on Google, we'll find kind of who's doing good work. We'll call them up, better understand what they're doing. But regardless, we're taking them through also a vetting process, right? We're understanding how they do construction. We're shadowing them in many cases in construction to understand what that actually looks like. And then for each project, we're also looking at the pictures of the installation of the measures installed, pictures before and after, so we can see the actual quality of the work. And then at the end of the day, we're looking at the data, right? So contractors that do a great job, right, that's going to show in the data that they're outperforming our expectations, and vice versa as well. But what we also find is a lot of contractors, especially doing kind of newer technologies like heat pumps, are really learning from each other as well, right? Because some of them may be more or less comfortable with doing line sets or installing ductless versus ducted, and so we try to help them to get them up to speed, and also talk to their peers, right, in other and kind of non-competitive parts of that same state or same area, to learn best practices. And we find that that's really effective, because people usually learn best from their peers.
And perhaps a follow-on question to that is, to what degree are the contractors responsible for quality versus the aggregator?
Yeah, so in the measured pathway, right, ultimately the aggregators are financially responsible, right? So in other words, and this shows up in Sealed's business, right? If the project is not done well, and I ran our service team for a couple years ago for a while, so I can tell you this personally, right? They come to us first, because we were the kind of the name, the brand name that they talked to and that they worked with, right? Regardless if it was directly our fault. So the aggregators are ultimately accountable, but because of that, the aggregators, including Sealed, right, make sure that there's an accountability mechanism also in play, an appropriate accountability mechanism in place for the contractors. So if we have a contractor, for example, that is continuously either not doing good work, and or frankly is just not doing, even if the work is good, if they're not answering customers' calls or emails, or they're tracking mud into the home, or anything that's kind of about the customer experience itself, right? We'll try to talk to them, but put them on probation. And in some cases, we've had to stop working with contractors because they won't meet those standards. So it's a sliding scale, but ultimately the aggregators are accountable, even as they kind of design systems to create responsibility with the contractors as well.
Claudia, I see you've got your hand up. Let's go to you for your question.
Oh, thank you, Maddie. It's a couple questions. One is the duration of the agreement, right? The way I understood, you said that it's a 20-year agreement.
It's up to 20 years. It's up to
20 years, right? So it's amortized for 20 years. What happens if the property is sold?
Yeah, and I just want to distinguish, there's, I'll talk about Sealed's business model in this context. This would be different from the way the kind of measured savings pathway would work for the homes program incentives, which would only be probably a measurement period of 1 to 2 years at most. But for Sealed, the way that our financing program works is we have an early payment schedule that's embodied in every contract that starts at the value of the project and goes down over time. And so basically, if a customer moves, they can elect to either transfer the agreement to the next homeowner, has to qualify and agree to our terms, or, which is what most of our customers do, they can essentially buy out of the agreement at that point based on the remaining value of the project.
Okay. Thank you. How about the credit ratings and income? The folks we're talking about are LMI folks. It seems that that would be additional somewhat hoping not, but potentially additional dollars would have to be at the table, discretionary dollars that might not be available for this group. How would the SEALS program assist on that side of things?
Yeah, great question. And again, I want to just to reemphasize, I want to separate out kind of Sealed as providing a financing kind of offering, which today is really aimed at market rate customers, to your question, and the kind of broader aggregator model, which can serve both market rate and we think especially low income households, because there's usually more soft cost barriers on the low income side, and the way that the homes program is written, the incentives will be larger for that. So for Sealed right now, right, we're very conscious. We have, minimum FICO, and the reason for that is we don't want to provide financing to someone who has an inability or struggle to repay, right? We want to make sure we're always providing responsible financing products, and there's, a variety of ways to do that. So from a financing perspective, our business currently is really focused on the market rate. We are actually exploring ways we can serve the low to moderate income market. My colleague Scott, who's on the line right now, is leading a research effort with some Duke MBA students to better understand the market and kind of what role responsible financing could play there. But I think that for the homes program and the IRA, the good news is we think that the value from the incentives alone, which is not financing, doesn't need to get paid back by the low to moderate income household, stacked with other local and state incentives, can get hopefully pretty close to that 80% cap that's in the bill, because we think for the low and moderate income sector, right, financing is not always appropriate, right? Sometimes you want to just be able to cover as much of the cost as possible to minimize any out of pocket even over time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Claudia. I'm going to go back to the chat to hopefully hit a couple of these questions, and then we'll go to Vicky. So there's a question in the chat from Julie who asks, what protections are in place to safeguard the upfront payments to contractors? Do you do holdback or partial payments, etc.?
Yeah. So again, I'll in our business today, right? When we make a commitment, we stand by it, right? So we estimate the incentive levels, whatever they are, whatever the program is, upfront to the consumer, to the customer, and to the contractor. And if we got that wrong in some way, shape, or form, and this happens sometimes, we'll eat the difference, right? So if we calculated it wrong, or sometimes program funds run out before we're doing it, there's all sorts of scenarios that I'm sure many of you have experienced. That's ultimately on us, right? When we make a commitment to the contractor and the consumer about a certain incentive level, we stick by that. Now, sometimes things will change before installation happens, right? And we'll want to then go back and say, hey, this thing changed, or we made a mistake, and here's the updated numbers. If you don't want to move forward, we'll understand. But after the project is actually completed, right? If we made a commitment, we're going to stand by it. And similar thing, again, in the context of the IRA and homes, that we believe that Sealed and other aggregators will hold by, is if you say that something is worth something once that project is installed, as long as it's done to the specs that were agreed to, right? That money should be there up front. And then again, any risk and other burdens, are held by the aggregator over time.
The next question is about fuel switching from delivered fuels to heat pumps. And the question in the chat is, how do you get the before installation usage data? And what do you do if the homeowner doesn't have those bills or receipts anymore?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the easy button for this is always to either for someone like Sealed or for the customer themselves to call or email their fuel supplier and request a ledger of their deliveries over the last 12 to 24 months, right? That's most of the time that's enough to do it. If for whatever reason that doesn't exist, right? They use cash on demand, or the oil company went belly up, or they just refuse to share the data. That is a limitation to the measured pathway, right? So for us, we can't qualify them for our financing program. And so one thing we think is important in the IRA, right, is that there are limited qualified exceptions for the measured pathway where, certain projects can and should do some form of modeled calculations and incentives without requiring full energy usage. But we also think there should be kind of proof, or at least attestation with consequences, because what you don't want are people saying, oh, I don't know where my energy usage history is, right? Like, you want there to be, kind of a strong framework for people to be incentivized to share their energy information. And we think, just frankly, based on the math of how valuable we think the incentives will be for measured, we think there's going to be a natural market pressure where, if that data exists, it'll be shared. And if it's not available, there should be an alternative for that customer to get an incentive through another pathway.
Thanks, Vicky. Let's go to you. You've got your hand up.
Hi, thank you. And I'm seeing a lot of really great questions in the chat, so I'll just try to keep this brief. But I think the struggle for those of us with very well established energy efficiency programs based on modeled savings is, how do we explore other avenues without being disruptive to the market that we've created? So, in what way would you try to implement a measured energy program, energy savings program, where you already have robust modeled programs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this, it's I would analogize it to, if you have an entire, infrastructure of gas stations and gas powered cars, right? How do you introduce electric vehicle, infrastructure? And the answer is that there's, different ways to do it for different markets. So devil as always is in the details. But at a high level, I think the way you do it is you offer both approaches, right? So, I'm not advocating, nor do I think anybody is, especially if you have an existing modeled program that's working, keep doing it, right? Keep the same processes. But what offering a measured pathway in addition does is it creates a natural alternative to start to transform the market, right? So companies like Sealed can come in, right, and say, okay, contractor, you can keep, doing the model pathway, keep doing the same old, that's totally fine. But some contractors are going to want to do something in a little different way, and we'll focus on creating success stories and case studies with those contractors to use the measured pathway. And then the onus is on the aggregators, right, is on the market to demonstrate that it's better to the contractors than their current approach. And if we can't do that, then, you tried something, it didn't work, and you move on, right? But I suspect that what's going to happen is, when you introduce that, there'll be some learnings in the market, but more and more contractors will prefer to go through the measured pathway. And then at that point, you can reassess kind of what you want to do from a longer period of time, kind of post IRA dollars. But I think offering both is the best way to not disrupt anything too much today, but to start to transform the market and offer other strategies out to your contractors.
The next question we have is, do states get copies of your contracts with the customers? And maybe we should rephrase that to, can states get copies of your contracts with customers?
Yeah, absolutely. Upon request, yeah, and I'm going to put out my contact information here, so feel free to email me, and happy to share.
You know what? That's a maybe good, interesting distinction, which is like, can states see what's currently available, and also, like, as a programmatic process, do states have the opportunity to review the contracts?
Yeah. So in answer to both questions is yes. We work in a lot of states. We actually have a number of partnerships, including with utilities in a lot of those, as well as with certain state entities. And in each state, when we go through it, we also this is just Sealed as a business. We're looking at all of the kind of like local laws and regulations, and oftentimes we'll have a state-specific piece of paperwork around consumer protection or around something that's unique to that state that will make sure that customers in that state are signing. And we think that's a great thing, right? Because it allows each state to make sure that this kind of measured pathway model, right, whether it's on the financing side and or on the incentive side, is really reflecting the local conditions on the ground. And so we've shared it, and with the New York Department of Public Service, for example, right now we're the only, I think, energy efficiency DER company that's registered on their website. We've shared it with a number of other entities, so we're pretty open book when it comes to that.
The next question is, how do your calculations, I assume this is referring to savings calculations, account for the addition of air conditioning when there was none before?
Great question. So that's taken into account to our models. So I didn't get into this in too much detail, but the way that we kind of do our calculations is we look at data kind of in aggregate and portfolio level on how homes use energy before and after different improvements. And then we're basically using machine learning models, kind of specifically predictive analytics, to be able to determine what we think they're going to save. And so to be clear, we're not always right for any given home, right? There's a lot of variance on a home to home basis, but we're able to make, as an aggregator, we're able to make bets on a portfolio. So in a case where someone didn't have air conditioning before, usually it's not the case. Usually they're going from window AC of some kind to a heat pump, for example. But if there's very little or no air conditioning, that'll be integrated into those models. We'll know homes like that exhibit X amount of savings compared to homes that are starting with a more robust air conditioning system.
And the next question I'm going to augment slightly to make it broader in scope. There's a question about, tracking the necessity in the legislation to make sure that measures aren't being funded by two separate streams of federal dollars. And so there's a question in here about how to track that so that for sure that homes isn't paying for the same thing as HERA or weatherization, for example. But I'll expand on that question to include, are you thinking of leveraging other programs, or are you guys mostly just focused on homes?
No, I mean, we think, especially for the low to moderate income, you need as much help as you can get, right? You want to build as much things together. I'm not an expert on the exact specifics of how to kind of braid kind of the systems to track all of these things. Obviously, you want to make sure you're tracking it in the right way. And I think that's one other thing that aggregators should be responsible for, is making sure there's not that double dipping or double counting, right? And they should be accountable for that, as long as there's reasonable sources of data to make sure that they can check that didn't happen. But I do think we want to be really thoughtful about the right way to braid or stack. So, for example, one thing we think would make a lot of sense, and we're including this in our personal comments to the DOE RFI that's due this Friday, is that the HERA program, we think in many cases, just running the math, a lot of low to moderate income households will benefit from using the HERA program for electrification upgrades that don't save energy or save very, very small amounts of energy, right? Like electric panel upgrades, electric vehicle charging stations, induction stoves, et cetera. And so we think there should be able to be a braiding or stacking of the HERA incentives for that, while leveraging the homes measured pathway to maximize the incentive levels for the entire project. Because it's not just the weatherization and the heat pumps, right? To make these projects really happen, right, you need to oftentimes invest in electric upgrades, sometimes health and safety issues, right? These are whole home projects, and so being able to leverage as many federal as well as state and local and utility funds as possible, we think is really important.
There's a couple of questions that basically boil down to, how do you account for customer behavior in your modeling and the potential that I'm sure we're all aware of you using more energy after an efficiency upgrade. So however you account for that is of interest to the group.
Yeah, this old I always blame my old friend Jevons, right? He's just created this paradox, and everyone's we're all just living in it. It's a really good question. This is actually what I think one of the really benefits of the measured pathway are, because models oftentimes have a really difficult, have a really challenging job of trying to kind of predict human behavior, which is one of the hardest things to model in history. And so with the measured pathway, right, you're only looking at what actually happened, including and incorporating any behavioral changes. So for example, when Sealed predicts energy savings, right, we're looking at how homes have actually responded. Our predictions are based on actual data. So they're looking at how homes have actually responded to these measures, incorporating all those behavioral effects. So I may not know especially for any given home, exactly how much take back effect there was or what have you, but I can make sure that it's netted out of my predictions. And then therefore, and I can also do things that maybe counteract that. So prior to Sealed, I helped build a company in the behavioral energy efficiency space. And so learned a lot about kind of things you can do to influence people's behavior around their energy use patterns. And so it actually, I think, opens up a lot of innovation to aggregators through the measured savings pathway to make sure that you're not only installing the measures in the proper way, but you're setting up the right smart defaults and thermostats and kind of putting things in the right pathway for for kind of total energy usage reductions. You're just, again, creating the right market, creating the right incentives to address that.
There is a question that I think follows nicely to what you were just describing, which is if Sealed provides a certificate of sorts that can be provided afterwards that demonstrates that a specific percentage of a reduction has been achieved.
Great question. So, one of the benefits we definitely tell our customers is they're going to have proof in their bills from us on how much energy was saved, right? That they can take to their realtor. There's a lot of great companies that are doing, that are creating kind of the backbone for this. Companies like Pearl that are out there that we're also kind of partnering, working with. But yeah, I think it's a great idea. We're always looking to improve our product and provide better ways. A lot of it we find comes in devil in the details and what's the granularity of information that people really want for different use cases. So whoever asked the question, if you want to shoot me an email, happy to talk in more detail about it. But yeah, definitely agree that's an important thing.
Yep. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversations about the certification that is required in the legislation to document what's been done.
Yep.
So I think maybe the last question, we've got a question about who is actually the one doing the purchasing of the equipment and the supplies, and who is covering the sales tax on these purchases.
Great question. Well, I am not a tax accountant. So what I will tell you is it's whoever is purchasing the equipment. My understanding is that they're the ones with the sales tax, right? But again, this is not tax advice. I'm not an accountant. But in general, I think one of the, again, great benefits of the measured savings pathway and aggregators is that there's a lot of different business models that can come out, even just related to who's purchasing the equipment, right? So today, for the most part, the contractors we work with purchase their own equipment, right? There are other companies like Elephant Energy, for example, out in Colorado, that are working on models to do a lot of the bulk purchasing to make that more simple. And they're an example of someone who could be an aggregator that then takes some of those dollars to be able to lower the price of the equipment even further, providing an even greater value to the contractors, right? So there's a lot of different models that can come out of this related to all sorts of aspects of kind of program and project delivery, and procurement, kind of mass procurement is one of them. You could have a distributor, for example, that is an aggregator, and all they do is they take some or all of the incentive and they use it to buy down the cost of equipment that they're selling to contractors, so that the pricing in the market is just lower, right? That's another potential.
We are just about out of time, so I'll say thank you to Andy. I thought your presentation was really informative, and thank you for responding to all of these questions. I'm happy to Andy, I hope you don't mind me offering this up on your behalf, but I'm happy to facilitate calls and introductions among all the state energy offices that might be interested in more information, or just maybe just more calls to talk through this more. Happy to organize that for folks who are interested. Yeah, so thank you. I'll send her on the recording and the slides, and yeah, just reach out to me if you want to get in touch with Andy, or you can reach out to him directly. Otherwise, I think that's it for us, and we will see you next week when we'll have a presentation from Massachusetts about their residential program. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Maddie.